Today I'm going to run you through the steps of how to make a coil pot. Today's lesson is just going to be the first step in the process. So I'm going to show you how to make the base and the coils and attach the first coil and subsequent coils so we can start to produce our shape until the point where the clay is too heavy and won't take any more, and then I'll show you how to wrap it up. Okay, I'm just going to take a small piece of clay off of the top. So I'll use my cutting wire by narrowing the length down using wrapping around my fingers. I'll just pull it straight through the clay, and there's my first piece to get started with. Okay, I'm just going to tear off a piece of the clay the size that I want, that I've worked out given the diagram that I had put together as part of my design. I'm just rounding that off. Once I've got that into a bowl, that's the shape that I prefer to start working everything with. I can then place it in the middle, and what I'm going to try and do now is construct a base. So I'm going to squash it down and use the palm of my hand to spread it out into a roughly even shape. So that it doesn't stick halfway, I'm going to turn it over and spread it out a little bit further. Now for my liking, I'm quite happy to stick with that as a base, as that's going to be the shape of my pot initially. I will trim it up with the coils when I start. Some people prefer to create their base with a rolling pin, which is fine. You can just roll it back and forward to get it smoother, like making a pizza. The only disadvantage I find with this particular method is if the clay is too wet, it tends to stick to the roller, and it's also sometimes a little hard to get the clay back off the table nicely. As we can see here, it's stuck, but in this case it's still okay, still repairable, ready to start. Okay, to roll our first coil is the same thing. We take a bit of clay, rather this time than start in a ball, you just slowly squeeze the clay out into what's going to be the beginning of a snake, if you want to call that, or a clay coil. You can do this with a machine called an extruder, but it's much nicer if you make the coils by hand. So this is how we start. I tend to put all 4 fingers across the top of the clay, and then I roll forward till it nearly hits my palm, and then back. And I slowly work my way along, trying to keep that round shape. If your clay is the right moisture consistency, it will roll very nicely. Once again, you have to think about the size of the piece that you're building. Obviously for a smaller pot you use smaller coils, for a bigger pot bigger coils. But for the size of base that I made before, that's probably the right size coil. Okay, as you can see, I've put the base onto a wooden bat, it's called, that you normally use for turning on the wheel. However, this makes it easy to lift off and to transport the piece for storage in between the different layers as it dries. I've also just used a metal kidney rib, as a lot of people don't tend to like too much finger work in the clay. I'm personally a bit of a fan of it, but the kidney you just run across the surface, and as you can see it just smooths it up. Changing directions will help to smooth it. I've got it on a turning ring, which just makes it easier to work rather than have to turn around my work or have to turn the board. You can use simple ones of these, which are just the things you use for a cake base, which are only about a centimetre thick, but this is a proper clay one. Okay, to attach our first coil, we need to make sure that we have strong adhesion to any 2 surfaces of clay attached together. So we work our way around our base, making a simple crisscross pattern just into the surface, all the way around. If it overlaps a little bit larger than the area you need, that's fine. So I'll just quickly move my way around. What we're then going to do is use a slip that I've already prepared. As you'll notice, the slip is fairly creamy. Slip is a mixture of clay and water to the point where the clay can no longer absorb any water and becomes in suspension. The reason we use the slip rather than water is while we're building the layers up, because the clay as it gets wetter and heavier will collapse under its own weight. The slip allows us to use a material that will help to bond the coils and the base together, and any other elements we might add later, such as handles or bits coming off, depending on the form and the function that we're trying to achieve. This slip will not overlog the base, so it will help it to dry out a bit. So you want to have a good lather of that all the way around. Once it's sort of filled up those crosses pretty much, good coating. I've just used a small hake brush that I always have on hand with a little bowl. Slips are a very useful tool. So I then start with my first coil. I place it around the shape that I'm going to use. I'm just going to take the second coil and have a look and make sure I've got my desired shape. Okay, so I'll just attach the first coil now. The technique is to always start a little bit in from where you wish to have the work, because what you're going to be doing is using your thumb and pushing down as you go around. So that starts all the way around. So you want to create a complete connection. You can use your other hand to stop it from moving. All the way around. So you can see it starts to create a pattern of its own as you attach the coil. The same thing then happens on the inside, so I'll start from this way so that you can see. I'll use this finger in preference to my thumb. Same thing all the way through. And this process happens for every coil that you place. And what you're trying to do as you smooth the coil all the way around, you can see that the wall shape here is staying fairly consistent, and this is why I chose this particular thickness of coil for this base, because it sits proportionally once I've done this. I'll show you another way of doing it. When you come to attach your second coil, you always start with a little bit over the top and push in, like so. So it comes in like this. Some people prefer to use a tool similar to this. This tool has two ends. For this purpose we're going to use this spatula curved shape end, so it's a bit like a finger. You can then, I'll start from this way so you can see, use the rounded end the same as we did with the finger. I find this a little bit more awkward to use. It does have its purposes at different times for different things depending on the difficulty and the patterns and things that you're trying to create. I prefer working with my fingers, but everybody's different. So I'll just continue doing that inside one, and then I'll switch back to the outside again. Once again, just supporting it with my fingers so that it doesn't move around too much. Being ambidextrous can help at times when you're looking to do something a little bit faster than you normally would. So once we've worked our way all the way around, we're then ready to continue building coils up and keeping them. What I'm trying to do here is keeping this part fairly consistent so that when I place the next coil on, my height and everything starts moving the same. If you wish to smooth these parts out, now is the chance to do that. You can either do that one or two ways. Once again, you can use something like the tool we were using before to come along and smooth it out. You can also use your fingers to smooth it out. That's usually my preference as a first step. As a final step, if you'd still like to see it even smoother than what you've already got it, a metal shaped kidney will help, depending which edge you tend to give a little bit of a bend, and you can smooth it along taking a slither of clay off, and that will give you a smoother finish. Okay, it's up to you which edge you use. Some people like to use the smaller edge. It's whatever works. There's no hard and fast rules with clay. The principles and techniques of joining and building are consistent, but the finishes and the way that you get to the end result can vary between people. The basic rules are there as a guideline.